I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I'd like to ask if we could do the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Gurney, do you think you could lead us in the pledge? Thank you, sir.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Could I have roll call, please?
Yes. Vice Mayor Harrington?
Here.
Councilmember Edwards?
Here.
Councilmember Cook?
Here.
Councilmember Hundley?
Here.
Mayor Agramonte?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had a study session, so there's no report out of a closed session. So I'd like to know, does anyone have any, let me go to number one. Okay. Meeting dedications. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to...
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda.
Well, thank you so much. Second, please. Second. Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley?
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we are now at meeting dedications. Are there any meeting dedications this evening? Having none? And presentations.
Actually, could we, let's go back up and do public comment, please.
Oh, all right. Thanks. Do you want me to, I'll read, thank you. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not, oh God, I lost the screen. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less under state law unless otherwise permitted under the Ralph M. Brown Act. The merits of the matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the City Council and at this time. For items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Upon being acknowledged by the mayor, please step up to the podium and speak into the microphone. Begin by stating and spelling your name.
Hi, I'm Matt Metzler, M-E-T-Z-L-E-R, and I'm on the Community Services and Environment Commission. And I want to thank Councilmember Cook for appointing me to the commission. And I want to talk at tonight's meeting because I'm concerned about global climate disruption. We are all aware of the effect that greenhouse gases are having on our planet's climate. And I think it's important that the City of Sonoma do its part to reduce our production of greenhouse gases. We know that driving cars is a major source of carbon dioxide pollution, so by reducing our use of cars, we are doing something to help protect the climate. This is why I ride a bicycle around Sonoma instead of driving whenever possible. And I'm here tonight because I wanted to review an item that was approved, that you approved on the February 5th council meeting agenda to submit an application to renew the city's bicycle-friendly community status. This item came before the commission at our December meeting, and I wanted to inform the council that at that meeting we approved this item with reservations. And this is because I and others on the commission have had the experience of feeling that Sonoma is often not that bicycle friendly. We spoke at the commission meeting about how the city's bicycle infrastructure is sorely lacking. We have bike lanes that don't connect to each other or to any other obvious bike routes. And I've learned from the city staff that the Newcomb Street Bike Bridge won't be built until 10 years after it was first proposed. One of the bikes at Whole Foods shopping center was installed improperly too close to the wall to be very useful. The extra bike park on a plaza that I proposed a year and a half ago has still not been approved. And these are just a few of the many examples of how the built environment of our city is not as bicycle friendly as it should be. I'm often cut off by drivers using the bike lane to pass traffic on the right. Most of the serious bicyclists I know don't even ride around town because our roads are just too unsafe for cyclists. There is so much that needs to be done to make our town better for bicyclists and pedestrians. We need to make sure that the intersections have bulb outs for traffic calming and to make cyclists and pedestrians, so that cyclists and pedestrians can feel safe and not need to drive their cars to get anywhere. So doing things to make our city truly pedestrian and bicycle friendly will also have additional benefits of reducing traffic and parking hassles and making us all healthier and friendlier. I want to encourage the city, the council, to do everything, and not just to make the city more bicycle friendly, and not just assume that cars are the default transportation method around town. And thank you.
Or anyone, seeing no one step to the podium, I'd like to go on to presentations. This is a proclamation proclaiming the week of March 18 to 24, 2018 as National Surveyors Week in the city of Sonoma. And I believe I'm calling up Thomas Reeder from the Sonoma County chapter of the California Land Surveyors Association to receive the proclamation. Mr. Reeder? National Surveyors Week in the city of Sonoma, March 18 through 24, 2018. Whereas surveying has been an essential element in the development of the human environment since the beginning of recorded history, and it is a requirement in the planning and execution of nearly every form of construction, with its most familiar modern uses in the fields of transport, building and construction, communications, mapping, and the definition of legal boundaries for land and ownership. Whereas, in order to accomplish their objectives, surveyors use elements of engineering, physics, mathematics, astronomy, law, and history. And whereas, since the colonial days of the United States, surveyors have been leaders in the community, statesmen, influential citizens, and shapers of cultural standards. Former notable surveyors include George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Lewis N. Clark, Daniel Boone, and Henry David Thoreau, among many others. Whereas many services are now provided through the use of sophisticated surveying equipment and techniques, including satellite-borne remote sensing devices and automatic positioning, measuring, recording, and plotting equipment. And whereas the establishment of the week of March 18 through the 24th, 2018, as National Surveyors Week is a fitting tribute to all surveyors now, therefore it be it, I, Madeline Agramani, Mayor of the City of Sonoma, do hereby proclaim the week of March 18 through March 24th, 2018 as National Surveyors Week in the City of Sonoma. In witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Sonoma to be affixed this 5th day of March 2018. Mr. Reeder, if you'd like to say something, that would be great. You can step up to the
So I'll keep it brief. I know you guys have a lot of stuff to get to, but we take this week to sort of... This way or this way? Oh, so I don't talk to you guys, I talk to them. So you guys... we just like to take this week, so like she said, I'm from California Land Surveyors Association. Sonoma County was actually the founding chapter of the entire state organization, which is pretty neat. It was done by Dick Hogan, which was the father of the guy who runs our company now, but it's pretty neat. And we have a little bit of history, I guess, in California. So We use this week to sort of let everybody know who we are. Most people don't know who surveyors are. They usually are told they need to get one, and then they learn who we are. So what we do is we determine boundary locations, and then we're usually the first on a job site and then the last ones to leave. We tell people where buildings are supposed to be. We work with contractors, architects, civil engineers, structural engineers, and geotechnical engineers, so we're all over the map. So it's a pretty fun profession. I guess the last thing that we like to let people know is the monuments in the ground are usually little iron pipes. They're very difficult to find, hence why we're hired. If they're removed, they can cost thousands of dollars to replace. Many people don't know this. So in simple things like fence construction or any of those sort of things that you're working in your house, or if you're doing gardening and you think it's ugly and you rip it right out, if it was about that long, you probably ripped out a boundary marker if it's close to a corner. And most people get sticker shock when we tell them it's about $5,000 to usually replace them, unless it's in like a subdivision, but they're pretty expensive. And then also surveyors do have the right to trespass, but it's courtesy for us to come to your front door and ask permission for entry. But don't shoo us off with a shovel or threaten to shoot us, or we've seen it all. So thank you guys for taking the time to kind of learn a little bit about what surveying is. If you have any questions, we're a very talkative group, and we know a lot about history, and most of us will chat your ear off. So thank you guys.
And while Mayor Agramonte comes back to the dais, I just also want to recognize that Colleen Ferguson, our city engineer, public works director, is also a registered land surveyor, and not a combination you often get in a public works director. So just want to acknowledge that she also has that expertise.
So, somebody will have to remind me, we sort of slipped to our consent calendar.
Now our
and we've
consent
done that.
calendar.
Is that- No, okay, thanks. So what I'd like to do now is does anyone have any changes, or would you like anything pulled from the consent agenda? Having none? It's out to the public? Seeing no one rise, I'm bringing it back to what is the pleasure of the council?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar items 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3.
I'll second that.
Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards? Yes. Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
Thank you.
I'm now going on back to our public hearing, and I am asking, our city clerk will announce all three public hearings, open the public hearing, and continue it to a date to be announced at a meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Agramonte. So as council is aware, we held about a 5.5-hour session last Thursday dealing with 3 residential lot appeals on Brazil Street and 4th Street East. Council was able to get through the first public hearing, but provide some initial direction. But the final 2 public hearings still needed to be scheduled. So the direction that council at that meeting was to continue it to today, not to hear any item, but just for scheduling. So we have worked over the past few days to look at different dates, and unfortunately, we do not have a date that works for everyone. So as you can appreciate, we need to get dates that work for council, and we had 5 dates that we explored. We need dates that work for all 5 council members. We need dates that work with the applicants team, and we need dates that work with the appellants team. So not a surprise, unfortunately, we were unable to basically schedule it to tonight, say we're going to do it on X date and continue it. So what we'll need to do is we will need to go back out after this meeting, look for an additional dates, survey 3 group of folks that we need to be there to participate, and then we will need to re-notice. So it will require an additional 20-day notice, which is something we are trying to potentially not be able to do.
But could we continue this to our next meeting to avoid that?
You could do that, yes.
I would suggest we do that then.
I agree. I'd rather do that.
So we can continue to the March 19th meeting for the purposes not of hearing the item, but for the purposes of setting an additional date and looking for an additional date. So at this point, council, I would ask you to, I guess, Jeff, the action is to open the public hearing. And if there's any comments by many members of the public, just on the re-agendizing, not on the topic of the agenda. But we do need to briefly, but let's open all three. If any member of the public would like to speak on the issue of agendizing, you can speak, and then we'll bring it back to council, and then we'll ask for a motion for you to continue it to the March 19th meeting.
So I'd like to open this up to the public for purpose of discussing the re-agendizing of this issue and not the issue itself. Is there anyone from the public who would like to step forward? Seeing no one rise and step to the podium, I'm closing the public meeting session. And so I think I'm looking for a motion now.
I'll make a motion, but I just wanted to, since we continued it to today, I just want to express my feelings that there's no reason why in a 2-week period a date can't be had, that I expect fully, this isn't directed at staff per se, but I expect fully over the next 2 weeks that anyone who wants to attend is going to figure out how to get a date scheduled with us. It would be, I think, unacceptable to say we can't find a date in over a 2-week period.
I think we'll be able to find a date, but again, we had Friday and we had Monday too, and both the applicant and the appellant, as you all understand, have their team that need to be there, and folks do have, whether it's, medical issues or vacations or things planned, so there's a lot of choreography, but with the timeline, we'd hoped we'd be able to bring a date certain, but knew it would be a bit of a push, where we're not able to do it this meeting, but in the next 2 weeks. So we'll be going back out to council to explore dates that work with all of you, and then we'll also be talking with the applicant and the appellants.
Well, there certainly were a lot of moving parts in this.
I'm not blaming anyone.
Yeah,
I want to.
I think there's enough time that we should be able to find a date certain at this point to
agree.
carry it to. That would be everyone's goal.
Thank you. So I understand you have a motion, Vice Mayor?
I'll make a motion to continue these 3 matters to the next city council meeting.
I'll second.
And that date is, did I hear that?
Be March 19th.
All right, thank you. And a second? Gary, thank you. Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Harrington,
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards, Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Councilmember Henley,
Aye.
Mayor Agarmonte.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. So I'm turning now to the city clerk.
We're moving into our regular calendar. The first item, 6.1, discussion, consideration, and approval of a continued public art partnership with Sonoma Valley Museum of Art for a temporary art installation inside Sonoma's Plaza in Depot Park from mid-June to late September 2018, including direction on funding, process, and ongoing program.
Are there any comments? Oh, I'm sorry. City Manager.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Agarmonte, council members, and members of the public. So I'm going to give you a brief overview on the item before you. Last year in 2017, the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art approached the city with a request to kind of do a beta project or a pilot project, put temporary public art in the plaza and Depot Park in conjunction with an exhibit they had with Albert Paley sculptures. And so council directed us to staff to work with them and put together a pilot program, and we did that over the next 3 or 4 months. And those sculptures were exhibited from July through a little actually into October because of the fires, a little longer than had been planned. And so there was a process that was completed there. And overall, we believe the pilot project and what we heard from both council members afterwards and the public was that it was a great success. And so the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art has approached the council again with a desire to continue this practice, and looking forward again for summer and fall of 2018. And so the proposed art they're doing this year last year was quite modern with Mr. Paley. This year is much more kind of realistic, and they're focusing on women's sculptures from California. So there are 3 women's sculptures, 2 from Southern California and 1 from Northern California, and then the pieces themselves are more life-sized, and I'll let the executive director of the museum use appropriate artistic language to describe the sculptures to you in a better way than I can. So if council wants to continue this partnership, here's the process staff would recommend. We, as staff, because of irrigation of things within the plaza, we would kind of determine potential locations. Then the Cultural Fine Arts would review the art pieces and assign places in conjunction with the museum. And then the city staff and the museum would determine installation requirements and any costs related to both plates and lighting. These pieces are smaller, so they may not need an engineering study. But if so, then the museum would be required to provide that. We have draft contracts now that we did last year, so that part of the operation is frankly far easier. We have templates to use, and you would be authorizing me to enter into contracts with the artists, the museum, and the city. And then the art would ship sometime in May and be here installed in June. And then again, it would come back out, and the museum would be responsible for putting the grass back in and any of the substrate. And my understanding of this museum is also working with the Sonoma Community Center to be another partner, as occurred last year. This year, the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art is requesting funding for this from the city to help with either renting or purchasing the plates. These are steel plates that the actual art gets attached to and helps make sure that both from security and stability. And then they also are interested in trying to light some of the pieces. So, and then there is a cost of someone to kind of manage the installation and all the work pieces here. So what staff is recommending is, we're still figuring out some of these pieces. One, we may not need lighting or have the ability to put lighting in, depending on the location. And two, we don't know the number of plates. We did explore purchasing some of the plates, but they're very expensive. So at this point, staff's recommendation is just to make a one-time $5,000 contribution from the council's discretionary fund. That would then up to a max to provide funding for either renting of the plates and or any lighting costs. And then there is about $2,000 that our special events manager, Lisa Jansen, would, that's a contract position, would be required. And overall, we think that we can absorb that in overall budget savings. And so that's kind of the plan for this year. If council is interested in having this continue going forward, that you think this is something that we should be doing every year, then we would also ask you to direct the Cultural and Fine Arts Commission to incorporate this kind of temporary public art into the city's existing public art policy and procedures. And maybe in the future, on the front end of this, potentially, like if council wants to move forward in this way, then fall of next year, the museum would start working with the Cultural Arts Commission, talking about different types of art, artists, et cetera, and it would go through the commission on the front end and then come to the council at the end. And there would be that would all be laid out in kind of a policy. So if you are supportive of moving forward, there is a resolution which basically approves the second annual temporary public art display in the plaza and depot. You would be approving the 3 artists that has been submitted and ask them to work with cultural arts to kind of, there are some final selections of specific cultures and their location, approving up to $5,000 for funding for the council discretionary fund and $2,000 for some staff support. Authorize me to execute all the agreements that are necessary and direct the Cultural and Fine Arts Commission to develop an ongoing temporary public art policy and program for your consideration. So I'd like to, at this point, ask Linda Keaton, the Executive Director of the museum, to come forward and provide her perspective.
Well, first off, I want to thank you, Madam Mayor, council members, Ms. Capriola, for the very successful public art partnership that was undertaken between the city and the museum last summer. From all indications, it was very successful. Tens of thousands of people, visitors and Sonomans alike, were able to interact, to see that public art. And we were able to bring 9 pieces of very large-scale public art from the East Coast here to Sonoma and install them in Depot Park, and 1 in front of the museum, 2 at the community center, and 5 in the plaza. So thank you very much for partnering with the museum on that. I brought some graphics. I don't know if those are available. Just to give you an idea of what we're looking at, we did collect quite a few public comments. That was a very important part of our process last summer, and this year we listened to the public comments, and we went with California sculptors. We're looking at women sculptors, and they're all representational works as well. And again, that was based on some of the feedback that we got last summer on what people might like to see moving forward. Two of the artists, as Kathy said, are from Los Angeles, and then there is one from Northern California also. So from our perspective, the cost for shipping, which was our major cost last year, the cost for shipping will be much less, so we're pleased about that. And the scale, I think, will be a little bit easier for us to work with. The sculptures will be installed, again, by professional art handlers. We'll make sure that they are safe and secure for the public and for the sculptures, of course. The museum will replace any lawn that's damaged, which we did last year as well. So all that will be taken care of. Do we have some images?
Why don't we see if there's any questions from
Sure.
council, and why don't you stay up here, Linda, if there's any questions, and then the images were in the agenda staff report, so any member of the public can also go on, but maybe any questions council
Yeah,
has?
Are there any questions or comments?
And then we'll go to public comment before we come back for council dialogue.
Yeah, question.
So I think I read that these are going to be life-size.
They are.
So each, whatever the creature is, they'll be a life-size. So one of the comments that I've gotten a question is people are afraid that they are going to attract more vandalism than the last statues, although I'm not sure why. But I assume these are insured so that if something happens to them.
They are. The museum takes out door-to-door insurance on all of the pieces, and like the Paley sculptures, they do have a coating on them so that if they're graffitied, that graffiti will basically wash off with pressure washing.
Are there any other questions?
I don't know if you want to take a look at some of the pieces that are available. If you want to just kind of go to the, I think, third or fourth one we'll talk about. There's quite a number of pieces that are available. Gwen Murrell, the first artist, has a number of big cats. She's got cougars, panthers, and these are her tigers. There's 5 of these that are available. They have just been placed on the ground, but we would want to see them attached to a steel plate like we did last year. I think that's, again, it's for public safety and for the safety of the sculptures. Gwen's work has been seen. She installed 22 pieces of public art along the Avenue of the Stars. Her work is in Aspen, it's in San Francisco, it's in a lot of the fine art museums in California and throughout the world. She is an international artist as well. Can we see the next image? The deer, you can see how they're clustered together. There are 9 of these available, so it would be kind of nice to make a little grouping of them, or even 2 groupings of these, and again, they're life-size. Lisa Reinertsen is the artist that is from Northern California. She has done over 20 public art commissions, and you can see her work all over, especially Northern California, but she likewise is international. She's got her work in Guam, Canada, Mexico as well. And then the third artist that we're looking at is Allison Saar. These are the 2 that we're considering. Summer, the one on my left there, has lights in the abdomen. So the idea is the abundance of summer, and they sort of look like fireflies when they're illuminated. So that's what that round thing in her abdomen is. Allison is also an international artist. Her art is at the Sculpture Garden at the White House, at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Park. It's at the Minneapolis Art Museum, at LACMA, New York MoMA, at the Museum of Contemporary Art in New York as well, and a number of Los Angeles area museums. So again, 3 international artists, all from California, and all female sculptors.
Thank you. Oh,
There's a couple of the tigers installed, and I like the way they look near water, so think about that.
so do I have any questions, other questions from the city council? It's interesting, I think children are going to be very interested in these. And I know they were interested in the last exhibit.
They were.
They were fascinating, but I think these also will draw children.
I hope so.
Yeah, I believe so, thank you. So at this point, I have no questions from the council. I'd like to take this out to the public for comments. Are there any comments from our public? You've all had a chance to see them. So I think since no one's approaching the podium, I'd like to close section for public comments. And I don't think I heard any questions for you to answer. So I'm bringing it back to council for input and further direction. Mr. Edwards.
So, Madeline, or Mayor Agramonte, I'm fully in favor of this, and I think it was a great effort we did last time, and I'm in support of spending the $5,000 to support this. I think we earned a lot more than that back the last time we spent this money, and so I'm going to be supporting this. And your thoughts about the children, I can't wait to bring the Crescent Montessori kids down.
Are there any?
I wholeheartedly support this, and I loved last year because it was all big and surprising, and I think for a first year it was good to just, everyone knows it's there. But I think a lot of people that maybe weren't so crazy about last year, they will find this more comforting and familiar, and I just think that I can just imagine these creatures around our parks, and it would just be fun to come across them. So I also support allocating up to $5,000 in funding. And I do think this is something that should go forward, and I think that it makes sense to build it into the public art policy, which I believe there's things in that policy that we don't actually do. So I think that we just need to look at it completely and make it something that we actually will use. Yes, and I'm thrilled. And the fact that it's California artists and all 3 are women, I just can't think it could be better picked this year. So.
Are there any other comments?
I was just thinking last year, before we knew how it would turn out, we said that whether you liked it or not, it would generate a lot of discussion and debate. And I think that really happened, and that was fun to watch. And even the people that really didn't care for those sculptures, I think they had fun talking about it anyway. So this is a good program. Forward going, I'm glad to know that our Fine Arts Commission is going to review this. I feel like the people on there probably have more expertise with regard to art than I do, or many other of us up here. So I think that's a good way forward, and I hope we keep doing this.
Mr. Cook?
So I also do support this, so I will go ahead and make a motion for a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma approving a continued public art partnership with Sonoma Valley Museum of Art for temporary art installation inside Sonoma's Plaza and Depot Park from mid-June to late September 2018.
I'll second.
And we're also approving the $5,000?
Yes.
And is an additional $2,000?
The 2,000 just overall in budget savings will be able to cover.
So that would include that would be included in the motion?
It's in the resolution.
Okay, thank you. And do I have a second? Yes. Second, Mr. Edwards, thank you. Sorry.
Do we need to clarify about sending it to the Fine Arts Commission next year?
I don't think so, because I think I have no doubt they'll want to start working on this policy, and then it'll come back to you ahead of that. And I believe the process will front load it going to them in the future.
At this time, I'm asking for roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye, and I'd like to say thank you, Ms. Keaton, for bringing this to us, and it looks like you're going to be moving down the road with another commission. Thank you so much.
We can let the record reflect that the motion passed unanimously 5-0. You ready for the next item, Madam Mayor?
I am.
Discussion, consideration, and possible action regarding creation of an ad hoc city council subcommittee to work with Sonoma Overnight Support, SOS, to review and develop a strategy for homeless services, including to update the city SOS agreement and to direct staff to budget $20,000 in the fiscal year 18-19 budget as an additional one-time funding contribution to SOS.
So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the city manager.
Great, thank you, Mayor Gramonte and Council. So in front of you tonight is a discussion about creating an ad hoc committee to work with Sonoma Oversight and a one-time budget allocation. So as Council is fully aware, and some members of the community may also know, that the City of Sonoma has had a long partnership with Sonoma Overnight Support, one of our nonprofits, in the delivery of homeless services. And this occurred back in 2005 initially. And so with this, there was the original contribution through the redevelopment agency, through low moderate funding, was $15,000 a year. And then in 2009, there was actual, following the opening of the emergency shelter, SOS requested that funding go to $30,000, which was approved. And then with the elimination of redevelopment in 2011, the council kind of memorialized that agreement and put that agreement, basically that $30,000 coming from prior redevelopment funds. There is a contract with SOS that goes through 2030 for that $30,000. In 2017, Sonoma County initiated a Housing First, or coordinated entry program, which is kind of a streamlined process for accessing housing and shelter and services to end homelessness. And there's a variety of requirements with that program. And with it, there were conversations with all the homeless providers in the county. And SOS looked at that because in order to basically receive county funding, of which currently SOS receives $41,000 a year through this program, you had to agree to all the parameters that were outlined. And SOS first asked for some exemptions as a very small shelter, and those were not allowed. But based on some of the requirements for the program, and some of the issues are that includes that individuals can't be denied because of drug or alcohol use, and an inability to prioritize folks from Sonoma's homeless over kind of a county-wide program and allocation. And the SOS board decided that they would not participate in 18-19 and therefore are not taking that $41,000 in funding. So SOS sent a letter to the city, met with staff, and basically what they're requesting and what staff recommends in addition is to create an ad hoc committee comprised of 2 council members that would work with SOS and city staff during the fiscal year 18-19 to, one, kind of assess where we are with homeless services, a review and update that agreement that was originally put together in 2005, and then really develop kind of a strategy moving forward. In addition, staff recommends that basically what SOS is asking, if the city comes up with 20,000 of that 40, then they're looking for private donations to do the backfill and the rest. And so we would look for some one-time funding in the 18-19 budget. That could come from a variety of places. That could come from our current Housing Reserve Fund, which there is $20,000 left in that fund. It could also come just from general fund reserves. It could come from operating. I think as we put together the 18-19 budget, we could bring you, staff could bring back some recommendations as we look at that. So the recommendation basically in front of you is to appoint an ad hoc committee to work with SOS over the next year and direct staff to budget $20,000 in one-time funding for 18-19. And then that ad hoc committee would probably work with the county as well and then come back to the council for some updates and bringing back some recommendations. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm looking for
Yes, she's
staff.
just
Great.
arrived.
Okay, great. So if maybe it might be good also at this point before I turn it back to council for questions to ask Kathy King to come forward and anything that she would like to add.
Just in the nick of time. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Kathy King, and I am the Executive Director of Sonoma Overnight Support, and I reside in Moon Valley Mobile Home. First of all, I want to thank the council for considering the recommendations by the city staff to increase our funding. Due to the limitations that the new county Housing First has put on, we had to refuse the funding, our ability to ask for more funding. SOS has been responding to the expanded needs for food and shelter and services for the past 13 years. Homelessness is not what it was in the past 13 years, 10 years, or even before the wildfires. In 2017, we served 33,148 meals. That's almost 5,000 more than previous years. And this, even though we closed for 10 days while groups fed people in the valley and out at the Grange, we still had those numbers. We're grateful to the churches, foundations, civic groups, and individuals that support us over the years. The day services, we serve 620 individuals, unique individuals. It's a 32% over last year. We're now averaging 29 to 30 people a day that come in for day services. It's almost overwhelming. They get provided their food, they get to take a shower, do their laundry, and they have case management. Also, ongoing right now, 43 people have used our winter shelter out at Sonoma Alliance Church, and we're blessed to have them. There was 847 bed nights. We're averaging about 12 to 13 per night, taking them over there, and they're sleeping. So we still have 10 people on our wait list. We still have unofficial counts, 10 to 15 people parking in their cars. And we know from the preliminary homeless count that we did, my group alone counted 18 people under bridges. I ain't going to the bridges, but and in the creeks. That was one area in the Sonoma limits. So the staff and the board agrees with the recommendations from the city. We look forward to working together to meet the needs of those most vulnerable in our city by developing a short-term and a long-term strategy to care for the homeless. And I would be glad to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Are there any questions from the council?
Do you anticipate being able to raise the other $20,000? Do you have any pledges? Or?
We have, right now, we have a fund that's called the 1 in 400. We put an ad in the paper. We have $5,000 in there already. We have an anticipated of $2,000 in pledges, and I'm anticipating that will get there. It'll take a little while, but we'll get there. We also have expanded some of our foundation, although foundation income is limited here in Sonoma, but we've increased that to outreach to foundations outside the area. So that's the answer is yes.
Kathy, what are your numbers of folks from Sonoma that are?
What we do is we take a stat, we say, are you Sonoma natives, which is Sonoma residents, and we have them, they fill in a form every time they use our services. It's 75% Sonoma residents, 20% Valley, and 5% other.
Okay.
When we ask them if they're residents, that means they've lived here, they have family here, they've come back to take care of their parents, so indeed they are residents.
Thank you.
I think Councilmember Hundley, you have a question?
Yeah, could you explain a little more in detail about the decision to decline the county funding? And I was looking at the MOU, and I don't think I had even realized this before about some of the requirements in here are actually inconsistent with what the county wanted to do as far as intake requirements.
Correct. We would have to take individuals that had substance abuse, either alcohol or drugs, without testing. Then we would have to keep them in there and not exit them, even if they were showing signs of alcoholism or substance abuse, so that they could get housing first, which doesn't make sense to us, because people in the shelter are trying to be, it's a safe and sober shelter. We also test randomly, and if they test randomly, they have to exit for 72 hours, test positive, and then they get a second chance to come back. They test positive the second time, they're exited immediately. We wouldn't be able to do that. We wouldn't be able to use, we can't use cots, which we had 5 beds there that we were taking people over because they had expanded services. County says we can't do that. And the county also says they have one intake person that is supposed to help with housing throughout the whole county. Now imagine, how nuts that is. One person. Our case manager goes to, when someone wants to find a place, she goes with them. Helps them, assures people that they have an income, that they've been our resident, and we do one-on-one. We wouldn't be able to do that. So those are the pretty major things, because we can't, the intake, then people would check a box, they want to come to Sonoma, then they would send them here. We would be able to have right of refusal, but the right of refusal couldn't be that we know them to be, not someone who could be in our shelter. We wouldn't have a chance to say, we don't think that person's right for the shelter, because they have alcohol or drug problems or anything else. We wouldn't even be able to look at the vetting. So that's a real problem. It's dangerous, to tell you the truth.
So I have
Thanks.
a couple, I'm sorry, I have
Sure.
a couple of questions, but David, do you have any? None? So Kathy, you said that not you went under the bridge, but people went and looked for people. And that was one area. How many areas?
There were 9 maps, which the county hires out to a firm that splits up, they split up areas in Santa Rosa, San Francisco. So we had 9 maps, and then we had our homeless guides. I had a terrific guide with me. I did the driving, and Lena Alioto, our case manager, went out, and so did Robbie, the IT photographer. He said, this is a hot spot. I know this creek has people. So they climbed over, climbed down, climbed around, and sure enough, we found encampments. And the rest of the people were not allowed to get the, I asked, I said, well, how did it go? No, not allowed to tell you. We won't get those numbers until probably end of May, early June.
That's what I understand.
Yeah, which is too bad. But just from, if you figure out that we had 18 on the one map that I looked at, we had 15 in our shelter, another 5, maybe I think 6 in our haven. So right there, that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
My second question is, I know you have shared with me about transporting people back and forth to Alliance Church.
Correct.
Could you explain that process and the
Okay.
transportation
So
service?
what happens is, thank God for Verns and their van. People can come to the Haven at 5:30, and then they are served a hot meal at 6 o'clock, and then they're loaded into the vans, and we also have to have a cab because we have someone in a wheelchair, and we have 2 people with walkers. This is beyond heartbreaking, to have people that would have been out on the streets in that kind of condition. So we have a van and a car every night. They go to Sonoma Alliance Church, and in the fellowship hall, they get a sleeping bag donated by Kenwood
Rotary?
Rotary, Glen Ellen Rotary, and also Friedman's, and a pillow, and then they get to keep that. They sleep on the floor, but it's comfortable. They get a snack, and then in the morning, we bring them back to the Haven, and they get a meal, and that's at 8 o'clock, between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Then they can stay in the Haven during the day until 1:30, where they get the day services.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Are there any other questions from the city council? None? Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
I'm going to take this out to the public for comments. Having no comments, no one's rising to come to the podium, I'm turning back to the city council. I want to let you know that I did speak with Councilmember Hundley and ask, I would like to be on the ad hoc committee, and I asked Councilmember Hundley to serve on that ad hoc committee for me. As mayor, last year's mayor, I know that she did work with the Haven, so I look forward to that working arrangement. If anyone actually is not acceptable of that, and they would like to do that instead, I certainly would acquiesce. So at this point, do we have any comments? Any more questions or comments?
I would be very interested in being on this subcommittee. I've been working with Ms. King over the last couple years. We tried the safe parking. Good in theory, just didn't work out. But I think that, in our discussions we've had, we have a 10-year-old agreement. The world has changed since then. The things that Sonoma is not insulated from, the same things that are happening in other cities. We're just smaller, so we see it on a smaller scale. But, I work in Oakland a few days a week now, and I see what the mayor of Oakland's trying to do for their population. Is just something that we need to be strategic about, and we need to accept, the reality of the situation. And, I think Mayor Agramonte, she's got a history with working with organizations, and I think it's an opportunity to really think far ahead, maybe some big ideas. And I think that this community has shown that they will get behind things. So I think that it might just be a matter of thinking of what the next grand scheme is going to be. And so I support the funding. However, I would like to find another place to pull it out of besides the $50,000 we set aside for housing. Because even though it is related, when that money was pulled aside, it was after last year when we picked our strategic initiatives. One of those is housing. And I would just really like to have the $20,000 we have left in that fund remaining to start working on getting some housing strategies together, maybe like having some education about what opportunities are. So I would just like to keep the housing fund to actually move ahead on housing, because that's also an important piece. So I think that there might be some other places we might be able to squeeze it from instead, and if that's possible, that's what I would like to do.
So would you like to respond to that, city manager?
Well, I believe there's different options. I mean, it could come out of the housing reserve, it could come out of general reserve, maybe there's a piece of operating. So I think as we put the budget together, we're close enough to the budget, we should just weave it in that this is money for 18-19, starting July 1. So if council members have preferences on things, if for example, if other council members want to also kind of preserve the $20,000 in the reserve funding for other things, then that's good for us to know as we'll look at other options. We could also bring you a couple of options as we put the budget together. But
Sorry, Mr. Edwards?
So I'd be happy to have the both of you on this committee. I think it'd be great. In moving the funding around, maybe we want to use that funding. It sounds like Kathy's program is continuing to expand. So maybe down the road there's another location where this whole thing can move, and use that housing funding for that purpose at some point as a possibility. So I'll be supporting this tonight.
Thank you so much. Are there, what is, at this point, okay, comment?
I support Mayor Agramonte and Councilmember Hundley being on the subcommittee. I think that's great. And thank you for being willing to do that work. I just, it's obvious, but thank you so much to Kathy King for really being putting her own funding, in jeopardy in order to be thoughtful for the community to continue to have the Haven be a good fit for this community where it's located. And I just want to recognize that was a risk, and I'm wherever the funding does come from, ultimately I think we'll find it, but I'm really proud and happy to support you in making that decision, so thanks for doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
And also, we'll be supporting this tonight, and Councilmember Hundley and Mayor Agramonte. I think that the Haven is moving in the right direction, and I want to thank Kathy King for this. I know that when we were looking at the safe parking, I was one of the no votes on that, because I didn't want to put unnecessary burden on the SOS, because I think you guys do a great job. And this is another local control issue that I believe that Sonoma really needs to take a look at and have local control, because when we give our services out to other jurisdictions, this is what happens. They dictate and tell us what we need to do. So I want to thank you, and I hope that this committee is, very successful.
So I'm looking for our council for further direction with respect to a motion.
I would like to make a motion to appoint a ad hoc subcommittee consisting of Mayor Agramonte and myself to work with the city and SOS Homelessness Initiative and I would also like to direct staff to budget $20,000 of one-time funding for fiscal year 2018-19 for Sonoma overnight support.
I'll second that.
May I have a roll call, please?
Vice Mayor Harrington,
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards,
Yes.
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Councilmember Hunley,
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte.
Aye. Thank you so much. Thank you and congratulations, Kathy, and your board. Thank you very much. You do wonderful work.
Let the record reflect that the motion passed 5-0 unanimously.
Thank you. So we're now moving on to 6.3. Our city clerk will announce the item. Oh, gee. Was that me? She tried to kill me.
So
I'm sorry, 6.3?
Item 6.3, consideration, discussion, and possible action to adopt a resolution changing the city's community fund grant program to the Community Recreation and Community Services Program, and to authorize the city manager to execute 3-year contracts with the Sonoma Valley Boys and Girls Club, the Sonoma Community Center, Vintage House, and the Sonoma Ecology Center for providing core recreation and community services.
Thank you. And now I'd like to turn that over to the city manager.
Great. Mayor Agramonte and council members, so the item before you is a conversation we've talked about before, and as the council is fully aware, the city council has contributed grant funding to nonprofits for many years, almost 30 years and 20 years respectively, to a number of key nonprofits. And typically over the past few years, this has been to 4 nonprofits that really provide core recreation and community services. The city does not operate a recreation department. Many cities do, most cities do, and we'll talk a little more about that. But basically, the council has adopted a prior recreation community fundings program in 2009 and updated in 2010, and it really spoke to the reality that here in Sonoma, my old city popping in my brain, here in Sonoma, we have these outside nonprofits that really provide these core services, both in terms of facilities and programs. So in 2017, though, the council tried it kind of a different way, and that year, the funding grant guidelines were adopted, and it was more of a broader funding. So it went to probably about 23 different nonprofits, I think, received funding, and everyone got kind of smaller amounts. And the council wanted to review that, and so we did review that in October 2017. Sorry, not October, that was March of 2017. And the council at that point really expressed that they wanted to look at this a different way. So you, at that point, directed staff to come back and look at a hybrid approach where we would look at multi-year contracts with the key nonprofits that are really delivering those core recreation programs to our community. To also articulate, we have a lot of community events, and these community events come back every year and have to come back before council. And so we created what's before you, a heritage events and community events also, so we can articulate and support those nonprofits going forward. And then rather than creating a competitive grant program, which as a public agency in a city, we are not a foundation, we don't have some of that expertise and staff time to do, but what we did continue and is a discretionary fund grant program where council sets some discretionary funding aside, and then as individual items come forward, such as the art program, program that you just looked at tonight, you have some discretionary funding that you have ability to support initiatives throughout the year. So what's in front of you tonight is an update of the actual policy, which lays out how this works in terms of both the funding and the policy guidelines. And so basically that what staff is recommending is to do 3-year contracts, including this year for 17-18, with the key nonprofits, and those key nonprofits are Vintage House, Sonoma Community Center, Sonoma Valley Boys and Girls Club, and the Sonoma Ecology Center. And those are those organizations that are providing those core funding. In addition, there would be fee waivers and financial support for events that really celebrate our community's heritage and history. And I'll talk through those in a minute, and then the community events. So in terms of, as staff look through those items of where the number of kind of core recreation partnerships that we have, I think it's also important for the community to understand, in addition to this program, the city has taken financial investment and support into some other nonprofits as well. The Sebastiani Theater Foundation, the city basically pays 50%. We have a 25-year lease with the theater, which is in private ownership, and then we pay 50% of that lease, and the other 50% is paid by the Sebastiani Theater Foundation. And the city's also set aside $300,000 to improve ADA access to the theater. Back in 2014, the council approved $250,000 to set aside for the construction of a pool with Sonoma Valley Health and Recreation Association. Excuse me, and since '92, we've had a long-term partnership with Sonoma Valley Field of Dreams, and then you just heard about SOS. So as we talk about heritage events, some of the heritage events are 4th of July, the Vintage Festival, Bear Flag, and Mexican Independence Day. And then with community events, there are the city party, Cinco de Mayo, the plaza lighting, and spring egg hunt, hot chocolate, and the high school rally. So with each of those events, basically the city would waive the fees, and there would be city sponsorship. They would still need to comply with the city special event policy and oversight by the CSCC. But the city would also receive recognition as a sponsor. And then once a year, the nonprofits would come to the council to report on their event. So with this, these are the programs that are outlined, and there's a program history. And so what we're recommending is you approve the policy and then approve 3-year contracts with the nonprofits. And with that, since I'm losing my voice, I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the city council?
I have a question, but I guess I just want an explanation, and I was wondering if I could ask legal this. We're dealing with taxpayers' money. In a few instances, there's been one, at least on this list, that has endorsed something on a public hearing. Is there any trouble of the city of Sonoma giving money to that entity if they're being political?
Can you be more specific?
On one of the public hearings we had within the last week, one of the listed entities actually endorsed the appeal. And I just want to make sure that the city of Sonoma giving funds would not, would not get us in some kind of a hot water.
I really don't know. I'd have to take a look at that. I don't know.
I guess my additional question would be, I don't know anything about this. Having worked with many nonprofits, it seems to be a rule that nonprofits should not be involved in that. But nonprofits are made up of regular, everyday, good working people, and I don't know if they know those things, but I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
And I guess, just to go further, is there something that we can put in the resolution explaining that this is something that we would rather not see amend the resolution?
Well, we're trenching into the First Amendment here, where we're asking entities that we fund not to exercise certain First Amendment rights. And I think any kind of limitation of that sort would have to be very carefully worded and crafted. So for example, would the limitation, if it were to be applied to the Ecology Center, for example, preclude the Ecology Center from sending letters to the Congress or the President critical of legislation that was not protecting the environment or local land use issues? Or how extensive would you want this prohibition to reach?
No,
would
I
be
just wanted an
important.
explanation. I just didn't want this entity to get hurt or the city of Sonoma to get hurt with any litigation based on taxpayer funds going to an entity that was becoming political when it's something they shouldn't be. So I'm just asking for an explanation. I'm not
And
saying.
I don't know the answer whether the city runs afoul of the law in funding an agency that may be taking political positions on a local level. I do not know the answer to that question.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Huntley?
I mean, couldn't it be that there's just as a part of our policy that the money that we provide is not to go towards political advocacy, it's to go for programming or some accepted use, so that there's a line drawn that we are not, whatever we're paying for? But because we've had, at a recent hearing, there was one of the groups, but then there's also issues come up related to the different interest groups of each organization, and sometimes they come and speak on behalf of the groups that they represent. So I think I've seen at least a couple of the different groups up here.
Okay.
What are the rules about a 501c3 participating in, I just don't know the rules. What are the rules about a 501c3? I assume the Ecology Center is a 501c3. What are the rules about political participation, like speaking at an appeal? Do you know? Oh, I don't know either. Okay.
Sorry.
I mean,
So that's something that you will be able to bring back to us, so we will be able to move forward on that?
Yes, meaning the council could move forward on this with respect to all of the other agencies, if you wish, or a conditional approval pending receipt of an opinion from our office on whether or not that the action of the SEC presents issues.
David? Is that,
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I'm not here to say yes or no on that. This is just a question that I wanted an explanation on. Because it was a little confusing, because I know with the Chamber of Commerce and other issues, I just want to make sure that the council, myself and the colleagues, were not getting into something that we shouldn't be getting into, and if there could be an explanation.
So, I think the funding as articulated in these contracts will basically be to describe, we'll be taking the core description of the services and what they do, and that will be within the contract that they are providing, for the Boys and Girls Club, after school, youth enrichment, variety of kind of sports league. There'll be this kind of description of the core pieces that they do. The funding will not be able to use for any capital programs or those kind of physical investments. This is for core program piece for all these nonprofits. So we would be describing that, so it would not be used for any political advocacy. It sounds like our city attorney would need to review and investigate this a little bit. It could be, as we look at this program, if council wants to put some kind of condition. There's a variety of, like we're saying, we want them to look at having affordable rates, or those, some different things, conditions that were laid out within the program. And if one thing council wants to put is that there's, in particular, maybe that there's not land use position taken on the land use applications, which is a specific item that occurred with the Sonoma Ecology Center, that could be potentially, it's a question that obviously legal will need to look at, but it could be defined in that way.
so what I'm hearing, you're not saying it was the Ecology Center. This is not what I'm hearing. Okie dokie, so I just wanted to make that clear. If it wasn't, we shouldn't use their names.
No, sorry, I just think at this point where, the Sonoma Ecology Center their board did take a position on the 4th Street appeal that was in front of council last week. So I think that is the genesis of the question.
Okay, so we've already heard from our city attorney that you're going to look into that for us?
If the council so directs, I will, and as I said before, if the council wants to move on this item tonight, I think it can go forward in doing that with the caveat that our office would take a look at it, and if there are no issues, then it wouldn't come back. If there are issues, then it would come back. It's be subject to there being a finding that there are no legal problems with the council directing public funds to an organization that is advocating pro or con on local land use issues.
All right, thank you. So are there any other questions from the city council? Having none, I'm taking it out to the public for comments.
Hi, Fred Allebach, 19550 8th Street East. I think that's a very interesting question that Councilmember Cook brought up, and it brought to mind to me that the Visitors Bureau and the TID had taken positions on the local hotel and possibly wine tasting issues in the past, and they get quite a bit of city money. And on Measure B, the chamber took a political position, and they're getting $100,000. So I think that the issue of political speech with entities that get city money is, I'm not sure about the First Amendment, but I know that there's been a fair amount of political speech by entities that do get city money besides this last particular land use issue. So seems to me that people should be able to say what they want, how they see land use issues, and that seems to be a slippery slope to limit people's speech and, based on what they come out on a local issue. So I would prefer to see people able to comment on the land use issues that they would like and not have their city financing compromised in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Allebach.
Or their mayor, council members, Dean Zellers, Zellers, Grand President, Native Sons of the Golden West, past Grand President, and current Second Vice of the Sonoma Parlor 111. We are one of those Bear Flag events that's been held on the plaza in one way or another for the last 52 years. Will be, I think, our 53rd year. That event has become very expensive. The event itself, I'm connected to the Vintage Festival. We've been connected to other events on that list. I'm highly supportive of the event, and as well as the funding. We use that just to offset some of our own costs on real estate in the park and in the plaza, and we appreciate everything you've done to help us maintain our history of California, and I didn't need a land surveyor for that, but I certainly like the fact that California history has a place in this valley, and it's in our ritual, and it's in everyday life, and soon to be in your artwork that you're supporting too. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Zellers.
Madam Mayor and Council, my name is John Gurney, the Executive Director of the Sonoma Community Center, and I just want to take an opportunity to say thank you for taking this matter under consideration. I've completed 9 months in my position, and one of my early priorities was to hopefully establish this relationship with the city, and I have worked with the city manager. We've met several times, and I think this is a very logical and productive methodology to provide a recreation component for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gurney.
Good evening, Gary Saperstein, Interim Executive Director of the Visitors Bureau. And I also want to thank you all for looking at this issue as well, and for being the organization that has, for I believe it's 5 years now, put on the holiday lighting in the plaza, which is truly has become a community event. You've all had the opportunity to participate in it, especially this year, and it was so amazingly special this year that I really appreciate that you're looking at ways to help different organizations to put on these events that really have become part of the fabric of our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Saperstein.
Yeah, go ahead. Hi there, Priscilla Essert, Executive Director of Vintage House. And I just want to say I'm appreciative of all that you're doing, and we look forward to a fruitful partnership. And we see that together, with all of us on the same page, we can do some amazing things in this community. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Essert.
Good evening. I'm Carrie Dacey. I'm the 1-month CEO at Boys and Girls Clubs of Sonoma Valley. So I just jumped into this, and I just wanted to say thank you as well. I have really enjoyed working with you, Kathy, just in the few weeks that we have to establish these contracts and what would continue to provide our children in this valley with opportunities to avoid that summer learning loss that they have during the summer that I know you're very familiar with, that you've been funding for several years now. And we offered over 300 scholarships to kids last summer specifically, and that is our hope to continue to do that again this year. So the support that we receive gives us the opportunity to do that, and I just thank you so much for the opportunity.
May I ask your last name again?
Dacy, D-A-C-Y.
Thank you, Ms. Dacey.
Good evening, Council. Chris Petlock, 426 Napa Road, Sonoma. So I think these long-term funding contracts are really good. We saw what happened when the funding was pulled away from these organizations. A lot of them had to roll up some really special events, and luckily others were able to pick up those batons and move on. You know, I'm concerned about David Cook's line of questioning there. I think, you know, maybe the legal bar is a little too low, and maybe we should go for an ethical bar. You know, when I took an ethics class, the bar was set at conflict of interest was either in fact or appearance. And so maybe, you know, rules around commissioners not sitting on any of these boards, or same thing with the council not sitting on any of these boards where we're giving money. Just so there is some distance between any of these boards taking money and receiving money. I know there's none, maybe none now, but that should possibly be a rule so that, you know, we all feel good about where that money's going and how it's getting there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petlock.
Hello, my name is Holland Gistelli, and I'm an educator with the Sonoma Ecology Center. And I want to, first of all, say thank you to city staff and council members for your support over many years of a lot of our core programming, including science education programs, which we offer to all Sonoma Valley schools at no cost to the schools. We offer about 9 hours of science education to every 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade student. We have a new 6th grade program that we're rolling out this spring. Each of those programs also includes a field trip where we take these students out to local open spaces so they can do field experiments and science out in nature in the outdoors. And so that also allows these students to connect with their home in a way that they may not otherwise have had the chance to do. So they're getting the opportunity to connect and learn to love their home and what makes it special. Aside from our elementary school programs, we also offer a workforce training program for teens, our Enviro leaders, and that program is offered to all students in the Valley as well through an application process. And we help maintain and manage Sonoma Garden Park, which is a public park with demo gardens, and we offer community workshops, which are at very low cost to the community, adult education, events for all ages, as well as helping create and maintain a number of other open space parks throughout Sonoma. So there's the Montini Open Space Preserve, which the city owns, but we help provide services in terms of maintenance, trail work, and volunteer days. Nathanson Creek Preserve, which includes bike trail and native plant restoration garden, as well as Sonoma Overlook Trail, which is currently managed by Sonoma Overlook Trail Stewards, and we are the fiscal sponsors of that group. And yeah, I just wanted to, again, thank you for supporting that work over many, many years. And I also wanted to acknowledge this new multi-year process is really beneficial to this sort of programming because it allows us to also attract additional funding through match when we can say confidently that we have these other funds, which allows us to better plan beneficial programs for youth and adults in the community. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Are there any other?
Hi, my name is Alejandra Cervantes. I live in 18629 Sonoma Highway, and I'm the director of Nuestra Voz in Sonoma. I'm really grateful and thank you for this great idea that really benefits Nuestra Voz. Nuestra Voz develops leadership among Latino community, and we provide programs for all the town, Sonoma, Boys Hot Springs, Agua Caliente, for the families who are not able to pay memberships or involve children, but also for moms and dads to have the opportunity of practice exercise is what we have right now. We offer yoga, Zumba, karate, and it's just a space for people who want to give something to the community, but also for community who is not able to go to gyms or actually for a consciousness of being healthy and being active. And in 2000, I started with the idea of being part of the solution, not the problem. So I thought it was easy and just being involved and doing things. So Nuestra Voz is just grassroots, and we are volunteers, 100% volunteers. So we have no money, and I should start putting the application, but I don't have any money to pay. So this really, really helps, and I really, really appreciate it. And because donors start supporting a little bit, but very close to the event, like a month before. So for years, since 2009 that I started with this event, is well, I have more than 25 years helping to celebrate, to bring this event to the plaza for the community, but as a responsible person in 2009, and every year is very hard for me, but so I really appreciate that this really helped.
Muchas gracias, Señora Hernandez.
Thank you.
Are there any other speakers from the audience, from the public? So I'm going to be closing, I'm sorry. I'm going to be closing our public comment session, and Mr. Councilmember Cook.
Well, I'll go ahead and start first. Been on the council for 6 years. I think we're finally hitting a home run with this. This has been an issue. I do like the multi-year. I think it does help these organizations get their budgets together. I know that there's a lot of moving parts, and I just want to thank staff for doing all the work, and the nonprofits. When I look down at the Sonoma Boys and Girls Club, Sonoma Community Center, Sonoma Ecology Center, and the Vintage House of what they do is very amazing, and I support these groups. My explanation is just because my job on the council is to help, I'm going to say it, protect Sonoma, but that's what I'm here to do. So my questioning in no way was anything towards the Ecology Center. I just want to make sure that we're able to do our job, correctly. So I'm hoping that we will get a favorable explanation, and we can possibly work around that. But in no way would I want to take money away from the Sonoma Ecology Center because I saw the work that they did post-fire. It was amazing. I call myself a self-proclaimed erosion expert, and I've talked to these individuals, and I know the work that has been done at Montini, what has been done at the Overlook with the stewards. Fred Allerbach has spent hours and hours up there, and I would never want to take that away. So that's not what the questioning was at all. But I do want to take this time just to say, thank you to the nonprofits. I know that this has been a hard process. It's been since I've been on the council looking at this, how we can do this. If we look back how it was done 8 or 9 years ago when I used to sit out there, it was very archaic. There was actually a point where they would all get together and they would split up the money right there on the dais, or on the podium, trying to figure out who would get what so it would pass, especially during 2008 through 2010 when we were going through our economical times, the whole country. The nonprofits stood up and they helped the city by going through this process. So I feel that you're great partners of Sonoma, and I just appreciate all the work. So I will be supporting this tonight.
Yeah.
I support this also, and I think that Kathy Capriola, when she came here, put a lot of thought, both last year and this year, into how we might do this to get out of the business of appearing like a foundation, but also to not kind of cede our decision-making authority to some other body. And this is a really wonderful solution. I think it embodies truly supporting these organizations with a substantial amount of money so they can do some programming with it, giving them the long-term budgeting, forecasting that they need. And so I think it's really wonderful that this came about, and thank you. It took a lot of thought and hard work. So, and I know everyone worked with Kathy as well, but I can remember last year, I think we had like a matrix and a bunch of options, and this one, I think this is a home run. Just on the issue of the Ecology Center, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I absolutely don't support any form of censorship. I'm not interested in limiting anyone's political speech, and I'm not going to participate in that. And it is my vague recollection that with regard to lawmaking bodies having the right to limit free speech, you cannot tell one group that they can't come to a public forum and say what they want when you allow other groups to do that. And that sounds dangerous and like a First Amendment lawsuit. And I'm sure Mr. Walter will inform us of all the things attendant to that. But I don't have a problem with people expressing their legal free speech.
Councilmember Huntley. Thank you. So this has been an evolution. I was not a fan of the Tier 1 system when I came in, and so I might be the person to blame for getting the ball rolling. But in the beginning, the problems with the system was that usually the discussion was done after the budget was already put together. There was no set fund or no cap on anything, so it was just this ever sort of growing and increasing amount of money that then had to be shoved into a budget that was already drafted. And even though this explanation of recreation like kept being thrown out, like I've asked for 3 years, what is recreation and what exactly are we paying for? And usually the answer would be like, oh, recreation, recreation, that's recreation. So when I started hearing the direction Kathy was going, I was worried that we would just slip back into what we were before. But does this staff report talk about the website? Have you talked about that? So there's a graph on here where it actually lines things up in a very organized way, and there's also this great opportunity, even on our website, to just have, suddenly this page with all this information and all these programs. And once you start thinking about all these things, and you put the Spaziani Theater in there, and you put the Museum of Art and the Field of Dreams, like there's actually a lot of things that the city has been supporting. We've just never put them all on one piece of paper to really think about it. So I'm really impressed with all the things that we do. I do know that, so now that all that's been enumerated, so I feel like it actually, we're talking about something specific. I know that the multi-year agreements makes a lot more sense. So I'm happy about that. There is one piece that I feel is missing from this, and so a big part of the initial switch to the first community grant program was this accountability requirement. So we had this requirement that said the city requires a post-grant completion report to be submitted within 60 days of final payment, including complete breakdown of program, project revenue, and expenditures. For all grants exceeding $15,000, a mid-year progress report will be required to be submitted. And for the fact that this money, it's taxpayer money, and I think that everything that we do, we have to carefully account for, and I think that this is a requirement for people that we have these relationships with. Because I noticed on this policy, it just says that they will give an annual or oral report. But I think that these things need to be written, and I think it needs to include financial information. Specifically, what are they doing with the money that we are giving them? And so I think the nature of the money should require something like that. And it's really hot. This. You bring a vest. So, and I liked the small grant program that we had, because I do know that a lot of smaller nonprofits have felt left out of the Tier 1 system. For one, it's called Tier 1, so I think, so already kind of hurt some organizations' feelings. And if you look at our history of giving, we, throughout the years for 7 years here, 6 years there, the city has actually given a lot of money to other organizations. So I'm going to still hold out hope that one day we don't have to have a full-on, huge program, but I just think it's nice when there's, someone out there doing something that aligns with what the city wants to accomplish. And the other piece of this that I'm thrilled about is this concept of heritage events, because our special event system has been improving, and one of the things we heard were these events that came back year over year, having to go through this whole process again and again, and then also coming and asking for us to help with the fees. So first we created the discretionary fund, and then it was just well, we're going to support these events forever. Like the 4th of July parade, we're going to support it forever. Why don't we just admit that we're going to support it and make a program for it? So it's going to make life a little bit easier, and especially because you have to pay up front for some of these event fees, and so now you don't have to start scraping together cash so far ahead of your event. But and the last thing I wanted to note is that our fund right now is 1.5% of certain revenues. Well, the original intent was always for it to be 2%. And I'm not going to push for that today, but I'm just going to put that out there that the goal is 2%, and I would love to get to 2% one day.
Thank you. Councilmember Edwards?
Well, I'd love to go to 2% as well and give each of these people a little more money. I'll just go down the quick list. I don't have an issue with the Ecology Center coming out and making a political statement, because everybody else does. I agree with that. And when you make a statement, sometimes you have ramifications, sometimes you don't, but I don't have an issue with it. So I'm gonna support approving all of these. I think that these folks do a great job. I've invested in every one of them, except Kiwanis. No, not Kiwanis, but Seroptimus. Actually, I buy their lobsters. But I think to have them, require them to make a report every year, it's a lot of money, but it's not that much money. And I think if you look at what they do and what you see, what they do in the community, it's kind of, to me, it's self-reporting. I'd love once a year to come back and tell us where they're at. But as far as looking at financials and things like that, I don't know that that's necessary. So I will be supporting this tonight, and thank you all.
Thank you. So I just have to comment, I'm so happy about this, because when I first came to Daly City, I always look up government and see what's going on. And I was really shocked that this city did not have a recreation department. In fact, I heard council members, wonderful people, said, we could never do it this cheaply. So we're so lucky we don't have these services. Well, guess what? Now this is step one of having these services for the people of the city of Sonoma, and that's something I'm so excited about. I don't know what the status is at this point about the website, but I know I've seen a mock-up of it. It will say recreation, and it will say community services, I understand. That, to me, is a miracle. So I don't know if you realize this is a miracle. I am so happy for all of us. I appreciate the city council for going along with this, because I think it finally makes sense, and who knows where we go from here. Thanks for that. So if there are no other comments, I would like to ask for a motion, direction from the council. I think there's a resolution.
I'd like to make a motion for a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma approving changing the Community Fund Grant Program to the Community Recreational and Community Services Program, and to authorize the city manager to execute 3-year contracts with the Sonoma Boys and Girls Club, the Sonoma Community Center, the Vintage House, and the Sonoma Ecology Center for providing core recreation and community services.
Second.
Roll call, please.
And my only comment
sorry.
is, I do want legal just to look into that and then give an explanation.
Could I have a roll call, please?
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Humley?
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
Thank
And-
you.
And may I have a status on the website sometime? I don't know. I know we have a mock-up, but I'm not sure.
The site is up, and we will be expanding and adding to it. So the key items, but now based on this action, there'll be additional items that we'll be adding to.
Thank you.
Yeah, and before we move to the next item, can we take a 5-minute break? Thank you.
The sauna. Meeting again, our city clerk. 6.4.
All right. And before we do that, I'd like to reflect that the last motion on 6.3 was a unanimous vote.
Oh, thank you.
6.4, discussion, consideration, and possible action to adopt a resolution to approve the recycled water feasibility analysis prepared by GHD Inc.
I'd like to turn this over to the city manager.
Great. Well, Mayor Agramonte and council members, I really want to thank staff, in particular Colleen Ferguson, our Public Works Director, and Kat Wall, who's on vacation this week, have done a tremendous amount of work working with our consultant GHD. And I will turn it to Ms. Ferguson to give an overview of the staff report, and there'll be a presentation.
Great. All right, we're ready. Mayor Agramonte, council members, it's my pleasure to introduce the Recycled Water Feasibility Analysis presentation to the City Council and the community. The Recycled Water Feasibility Analysis was prepared by GHD, the same firm that prepared the Water Master Plan that you saw recently, and Matt Winkleman, who presented that, is also here to present the Recycled Water Feasibility Analysis. And again, we're fortunate that Matt has extensive experience with the City of Sonoma's water system and was available to work on this project and to present the results of the analysis to the council tonight. So this is our agenda for the presentation tonight. So I'll provide a brief description of recycled water, some background information, and describe the purpose for the recycled water feasibility analysis. Then I'll turn it over to Matt Winkleman from GHD, who will describe the current status of recycled water in our area and the analysis and conclusions from the feasibility analysis. And then I'll provide recommendations, and we'll open it up for a question and answer session at the end. So in case anyone's wondering, what is recycled water? Let's talk about that. You know, water is continually recycled through the water cycle in nature with rainfall, runoff, evaporation, and transpiration. All the water that we have on the planet is recycled. Modern wastewater treatment replicates this natural recycling process. So water from sinks, toilets, and indoor plumbing goes down the drain and is transported in sewer pipelines to the wastewater treatment facility where the water is treated to remove bacteria and pollutants. This tertiary treated wastewater meets strict standards set by the state of California. Recycled water is often used to irrigate agriculture and large landscape areas such as golf courses and athletic fields. Recycled water is transported through a system of purple pipes completely separate from the drinking water and wastewater systems. So I'll talk about a little bit of background, recycled water documents, and construction projects in our area. So this slide shows the background of recycled water documents. A recycled water feasibility study was prepared by the Sonoma County Water Agency in 2005. A recycled water project EIR in 2006, and a financial and economic analysis in 2009 were prepared by the Sonoma Valley County Sanitation District. The city's urban water management plan that was prepared in 2005 describes some recycled water items. Do I have that date right? Nope, 2015. Sorry, typo in my notes. Yes, I thought it was more current than that. And then a recycled water use agreement was executed between the city and the county sanitation district in 2016 for use of recycled water at the Sonoma Valley Oaks Park on English Street. And then in construction, the Sonoma Valley County Sanitation District has built several projects that are specific to recycled water. Two were at the wastewater treatment facility, a recycled water storage reservoir constructed in 2012, and water pumping and piping upgrades at that reservoir just recently completed. And then two projects north of the wastewater treatment facility, a pipeline going north to Watma Road, constructed in 2012, and then a pipeline extending up 5th Street east to Sonoma Valley High School, Adele Harrison Middle School, and the city's park on English Street. So in fiscal years 15, 16, and 16, 17, the city council goals included an initiative to explore opportunities to expand recycled water programs and projects. So the city retained consultant GHD to prepare the city's recycled water feasibility analysis. And the purpose of that feasibility analysis was to identify a preferred alignment to extend recycled water to the northern portion of the city based on a preliminary environmental review and also constructability and cost. And then also to determine whether the current costs of construction and ongoing operation of a recycled water system to the northern portion of the city would exceed the benefits. And so now I'll turn the presentation over to Matt Winkleman with GHD to talk about the work that they did.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council, and the public. It's nice to be back here talking about recycled water after a presentation on potable water this last month. Go ahead, please.
Thank you.
The graphic here shows the current recycled water system that heads north from the County Sanitation District's treatment facility. Colleen described that the pipeline now extends up to the high school and the middle school campus and to the city's park. This becomes the starting point for our analysis and looking at the cost and the feasibility of running additional facilities north up to areas within the northern portion of the city, including the Plaza, Arnold Field, Depot Park, the Veterans Cemetery, the Field of Dreams, Armstrong Park, the Patch, and other landscaped areas. Your current recycled water demand at the uses that are shown on the graphic are approximately 50 acre-feet per year for the high school and the middle school, and approximately 5 acre-feet per year for the Sonoma Valley Oaks Park. What we looked at in our analysis and in coordination with some of the planning documents that Ms. Ferguson noted earlier is that there could be a demand of recycled water within the city limits of approximately 64 to 76 acre-feet per year, in addition to what is currently being demanded at those other uses. So, go ahead, please. These are the components of the analysis. This is the, as you will, the outline of the analysis. We first determined potential alignments, and that was working with City Public Works staff. We conducted a field walkthrough with city staff, again, beginning at the corner of 5th and Denmark, working our way north towards the areas of use. We followed that work up with a review of utility maps. We looked at environmental considerations. We also considered constructability and costs. And in this context, constructability is looking at a number of factors, considering community impacts, environmental impacts, traffic, schedule, and other considerations that add more to the discussion of an alternative than simply just the cost. This is a graphic from the report. What's shown in purple is what we refer to as the preferred alignment. There at the lower left of the screen is the intersection of 5th Street East and Denmark. And the other alignments that we looked at through that process that I described are shown in the other colors and referred to as alternatives 1 through 4. Again, all generally working at that goal of getting the purple pipes up to those anticipated uses. We ended up with a preferred alternative that found its way north on 5th Street, headed west on MacArthur, and then north on 4th up to Spain Street. Then the alignment makes its way west towards the plaza at First Street East, and then north towards those uses. Obviously, these are areas that would affect the community through construction, and so that's the basis as to why we got into our evaluation. The preliminary environmental review evaluated the possible environmental constraints of the study area, including topics that are listed here. And I'll comment that all the alignment alternatives that you saw on the previous slide, the environmental setting for those is similar. One example is all alternatives would cross Nathanson Creek, and permitting agencies such as the U.S. Army Corps, the Regional Water Quality Board, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife would all have permitting oversight for construction activities that would be in the vicinity of that waterway. When we look at cost, we consider two basic components of that. There are the construction components and the non-construction components, and these are all rolled up into the costs that I'll present in a moment. Those construction components for this are generally 6 to 10 inch diameter purple pipes buried in the ground. A booster pump station located at Pinelli Park. The purpose of that is in looking at some of the hydraulic information provided by the County Sanitation District, and in talking with staff, recognizing that there needs to be additional pressure in the system in order to deliver the water to those customers, to the city's standards. We looked at a few alternatives and decided, working again with city staff, that the water could be boosted up to the Mountain Cemetery tank for storage to meet the demands throughout the course of the year, and that tank would require some renovations in order to take the recycled water. And there's a contingency that's built into the planning at this stage. Non-construction costs would be similar to many projects of this like, including design, environmental review, and permitting. Outreach is a very important aspect of this type of project as well. In addition, there would be construction phase services like construction management. This is a summary of the analysis as we looked at constructability and cost. Again, constructability considering many factors. The preferred alignment having a ranking of 1 in constructability. This is a fairly subjective ranking based on experience and a number of factors, and you can see a ranking of all the alternatives here. The cost ranking is simply comparing the cost, and that's the capital cost of each of these alternatives. And here are the costs, repeated over from the prior slide. You see that the preferred alignment, preferred alternative in this case, is $8.56 million. It's a large cost. There's a lot of infrastructure to build in order to bring the recycled water up to the northern part of the city. I'd like to comment that at this level of planning, at a cost analysis and a feasibility level, there's not a very large cost spread between these alternatives. But you can see here that the first few alternatives are definitely lower in cost compared to 4 and 5 on the list there. This slide basically shows the bottom line of the cost analysis. It is, as confirmed with the County Sanitation District in January, the city would be able to purchase recycled water from the county's treatment facility at a rate of $700 per acre foot. That is less than you're currently purchasing potable water through the aqueduct and the water agency at $945 an acre foot. So there is a savings there. The big cost difference comes in the cost of building that infrastructure. What we've done here is consistent with other county planning, is looked at a 40-year planning horizon to spread out the cost, that capital cost, and then we've looked at that on an acre-foot basis. And so you see that in the left column here, the cost of this new system would be approximately $3,500 an acre foot, whereas your current system of receiving and purchasing potable water is $945. That's quite a large spread of difference. So as to say that the cost feasibility, this is a very large cost for the city to be developing and begin using recycled water in this context. And perhaps it's that there's a relatively small demand of recycled water relative to the amount of cost that you would need to spend to deliver that water. I think that's why the cost is so different on an acre-foot basis. Okay, so thank you. I'll be here for questions at the end, but Colleen is going to complete the presentation.
Thank you, Matt. As we're wrapping up the presentation, I'm realizing that it may not have come through clearly that a lot of, well, the recycled water that is produced by the Sonoma Valley County Sanitation District wastewater treatment facility is extensively used for agriculture. Closer to the treatment facility, so those uses don't incur the high cost to transport and create the pressure and all that we would need to get it into the heart of Sonoma, that they're just a lot closer to where the water is generated. And so there's grapes and dairy fodder crops that are currently irrigated with the recycled water. And so it isn't like the recycled water is being produced and not used. It's being produced and used for agricultural purposes close to the treatment facility. So getting into the recommendations, so staff recommends that the council approve the recycled water feasibility analysis and know that the city would use the recycled water feasibility analysis as a resource document if additional or if appropriate, regional, state, or federal grant opportunities became available. Sometimes the grants are more specific to urban use of recycled water, and we would be looking for those opportunities. Staff also recommends that the city focus on the many capital improvement program projects that were identified in the Water Master Plan that was recently approved by the City Council. Those are important projects for the city at this time to have our potable water supply be sustainable for the community, and it's an important place to focus our water energies at this time. Staff also recommends that the city, again, continuing to focus on our sustainable water systems, support the use of recycled water for agricultural purposes, as is being done at this point. That reduces the demand on the groundwater resource, which does benefit the city of Sonoma. Staff also recommends continuing the support that we provide and education for water conservation in homes, businesses, and landscapes, and the ongoing aquifer storage and recovery project that we're working on in partnership with the Sonoma County Water Agency, and also that the city revisit recycled water costs and benefits in the future. And that concludes our presentation on the recycled water feasibility analysis, and our team is ready for questions.
Thank you so much. So does the council have any questions regarding this? Oh, Gary.
So I just have one quick question. So with Caltrans redoing Broadway in 2019, 2020, and with Purple Pipe already being at the high school, have we had any thought about installing the pipe from the high school up to the plaza while the road is torn up? Even if we just put it in there for a use at a later time.
I think the quick answer to that is no. And I don't know how that played out in the alternative analysis.
The direction at the time that we started this was it wouldn't be smart to plan to rip up Broadway in order to put in a Purple Pipe. So that condition is changed since. There would be some cost savings certainly with that. It could certainly be looked at. However, the cost to run the pipelines all the way up to the plaza and beyond would still be a high cost, and potentially still in an unfavorable position to how you're purchasing water today. It may be worth looking at, though.
Well, just a couple of comments on it. There are a lot of underground utilities in Broadway at this time that we would compete for space with those if we tried to put a Purple Pipe in there as well. And then every time we wanted to do something with the Purple Pipe, we would be working with Caltrans, and that's an ongoing additional cost and time burden on the city versus having it in our own right-of-way where we don't have to work with Caltrans.
So, go ahead.
Okay, I have a few questions.
One of them was some of the things I saw were like limitations or concerns about using recycled water in public places. But then, on the other hand, where this high school is going to be using recycled water to water its athletic fields, and we're using it to water the park that's south of my street. So, which one is it? Is it okay for people, or, because I hope so, because we're going to be using it for fields with children.
That's a matter of outreach, certainly, and the water is being treated to standards that are acceptable for irrigation purposes in public spaces like that. There are requirements on how much and where the water runs off to and how much contact, of course, but it certainly would be developed and used in city spaces consistent with contact with the public for irrigation and landscaped areas.
And so just to clarify, there is an attachment B that talks about recycled water use requirements. And it does say allowable uses of recycled water include irrigation of parks, schools, and playgrounds. So that's definitely an okay thing to do with the recycled water. But there are a lot of constraints on that as far as not having the overspray in a position where it could end up in a creek, which is a design challenge for Engler Park that we'll need to work with because it does have a drainage inlet kind of in the middle of the park. And so we have to carefully retrofit the irrigation system for that park to make sure that the water closest to the drain wasn't recycled water. It'd be potable water, and there'd be recycled water around that space. And then there are constraints on using it where people are picnicking and those kinds of uses.
So their signs, is it Essert Park, or what's the park that's,
It's called Sonoma Valley Oaks Park. It's on Engler Street. So we often
Oh.
call it Engler Park, but it's actually
That's the
Sonoma Valley
name.
Oaks Park.
I had no idea. So, because well, it will be used, it hasn't started being used there yet, correct?
The recycled water is right next to the park. It's available for us to tap into as soon as we found the budget to design a change to the way the system is set up there now. You know, it's potable water right now that irrigates the park, so we'd have to design a two-part irrigation system, part potable, part recycled water, and then have construction dollars to build it, and then could start irrigating that park in part with the recycled water.
So my next question is, so this study was about taking it from, 8th Street and taking it up to the Mountain Cemetery tank. Is it just because that tank was already there? Like, how big is that tank? Is that tank the size that we need, or is it just a big tank that we had somewhere? And what would be the size of tank that we would actually need versus what we just have sitting on a hill somewhere empty?
Good question.
I recall the tank is a 200,000 gallon tank. We will confirm that as needed. It does fit with the hydraulics for the water that we find is the demand, that 64 to 76 acre feet per year. The retrofit is not regarding the size, it's regarding the condition of the tank and retrofitting for new water intake and discharge.
Well, because I was just wondering, I mean, because that's going pretty far, but if the city wanted to consider something like doing it in steps, like if first go to Depot Park and get the plaza with it, like, what would that tank look like? Gary once had this idea for a cute little water tower somewhere for, rain. Yeah, well, that was for stormwater storage, but it's like, was there consideration of like intermediary steps other than just sort of going all the way to the cemetery and fixing an old busted tank?
Well, the reason to go up the hill is to generate the water pressure to feed the system. We either have to have a booster pump station that increases the pressure on the ground, or we pump the water up the hill and then gravity creates the pressure, and it's generally more cost effective to pump the water up the hill. This is how we pressurize the potable water system. We pump the water up to tanks and then the water feeds down into the system from the tanks, and that's where we get our water pressure. So this is taking the same approach with the recycled water.
And my last question, which is kind of like my overall, so this, I think it was, we added it first to our goals like in 2015, 16, was that the year? So it's sort of been quiet for a couple of years. But under purpose and assumptions, it says the purpose is to identify a preferred alignment, to extend recycled water to the northern portion of the city and determine whether the current costs exceed the benefits. So where did that purpose come from? Because I don't remember the council ever giving feedback like about sort of like what did we mean when we asked for a recycled water feasibility study, or like what would our objective be, where would we want to go, what do we want to cover? So I'm just wondering, all of this seemed to be based on presumptions that were made by somebody, but I just want to, where did it come from?
I'm
Probably
sorry, I'm not in a great position to answer that, and I don't know the city managers either.
Yeah, I mean, I think that council, the overall goals for council was explore recycled water and how do we put, what is the feasibility of doing recycled water? That's my understanding from conversations with the past Public Works Director and from looking some of the council goals. It was a very general conversation. But, you know, my understanding is that there was, as part of a budget, council authorized the funding for this, and I'm assuming in some kind of a budget conversation, there was discussion about this in front of the prior council. And, you know, I think from an engineer perspective, the question is, all right, if we want to provide the service, what does it cost in order to do that, and what are the routes in order to do it? So this, you know, this is definitely a technical kind of analysis that is in front of you, and it is kind of a technical roadmap for the future in terms of what we could fall back on and use as a planning document. That, since neither of us were here, that's as much, I think, context as I was provided by the last city manager and public works director.
Yeah, which makes it difficult to talk about. But it struck me because I was the one that added the goal, and I know what it said, and I remember it sort of coming up one time. But it's like when you're going to put money into a study and take all this time to do something, it seems like, you know, making sure it's going in the right direction. Yeah, because basically now we're looking at a source of technically cheaper water, but, you know, it's like a $9 million expense to get there, which isn't going to pencil out unless, you know, certain money comes available. You know, there could be interested organizations in the city to help us get over that, but it's like, I never saw it as like, is it going to be cheaper for us to use recycled water, everything included, because it's not going to be. So that just wouldn't have been the purpose that I picked. But I do see how that this could be very useful as we move forward, and it's been going on since 2005, and hopefully we'll still inch along every year. So I appreciate all of your hard work.
So yeah.
I guess I'm just, not with regard to this particular plan, but I think there's a value in having an option to obtain recycled water at a later time. And I actually used to live out in the country, and we were trying to get water down to our property because it was not, you know, was not on the city water. And originally, I want to say like in 2006, around then, it was like much easier to get a contract for recycled water because less people wanted it, and then it became incredibly valuable, and it was really hard to get a contract, and everybody wanted. At first, they were like, "If you have a water truck, come and take it." Like they were really trying to offload it. And I remember that very clearly, and then it switched over to like, well, probably like, you know, it just got really tightened up. So I'm wondering if there's any way that we can get an option or preserve some rights or make some kind of deal so that, you know, in the event of like true water, a lot of water scarcity, that we are not precluded, that we're in line. In the event that everybody gets in line to get this water and we need it, is there some way to preserve those rights?
I'm sure there is some way to preserve the rights. In my conversations with the county sanitation district staff, they've told me that the contract we have to purchase recycled water for Sonoma Valley Oaks Park we would pay the $700 per acre foot at such time that we retrofit our irrigation system and are ready to use it. They would be happy to sell us more recycled water at that price. While their planning documents call for 55 acre feet going to Sonoma, 50 acre feet to the schools, and 5 acre feet to the city park at this time. And they don't have numbers in there for more recycled water going to the city because it wasn't really in the next steps coming up. But they would make more recycled water available to the city if we were making steps to extend the water lines and be ready to use it. They've been clear about that. I think it would be a different kind of analysis to look at all the moving parts in the water world locally of shifting use of recycled water closer to the treatment facility to use of recycled water in the city that could result in more groundwater pumping closer to the bay, that could also impact groundwater availability in the region and potential saltwater intrusion and those kinds of things, and then the feasibility of our groundwater wells as well. And it would be a complicated analysis, but I don't think we'd want to just kind of go to recycled water without looking at all the ramifications of that to the city.
Sure, but if we can presume that groundwater is going to be highly regulated in the near future and also over the next 50 to 100 years, it will be highly regulated, and you will not be allowed to take as much as you want. You're just not going to be allowed to do that without paying whatever it's going to be. You know, Councilmember Cook has a better idea about that future than I do. At that time, right now, they're saying you can have as much as you want if you build the infrastructure. That's not the question. The question is, can we, not them saying that, can we have a written contract like a right of first refusal to a certain amount of acre feet? In the future, it is without question that having access to this water could be very valuable, and we might want to sell that access to somebody else for the revenue, or we might want to use that access to the water. It's a valuable resource, and the question is, before it is in peak demand, is there a way to enter into a contract to secure a right to that water?
So I don't think staff knows the answer to that right now, obviously. I think it would be a question we would have to have with the county district and talk that through and see. So, you know, if that's, I mean, there's definitely conversations that Colleen is having and exploring with them. You know, I think it would need, it'd be interesting to lay it out and see if it would be something that they would be willing to put in, and maybe it is just at least for the amount that we know from this study that we want. It may not be kind of, lots more, but maybe it's for an increment more, and we get something like that in writing. So we'd have to explore that and see.
So, David, do you have, Rachel would like to ask another question, but would you like?
No, I just have some comments after
okay.
public.
All right, this will be my last question. You might know this. So a lot of things have to happen. This is all going to evolve. I think recycled water is the future, probably sooner than later. But our treatment facility over on 8th Street, I know that they've been improving various pieces of it here and there. But do they have, what's the scope of the plans they have for either expanding their production capacity of treated water, or do we know sort of? Are they just, in the beginning, they had to give their water away because everyone was scared of it, and now people are starting to pay a little bit, we'll pay more, and I think that's why they would love to have us as a customer, but, have they started looking ahead of, expanding yet? Or is it more just infrastructure to deal with the water that they already produce?
I think if you go down and look at the facility, you see those two very large ponds that are just off of 8th Street. That's generally for equalization during storms. The storage is needed to control flows. It's much the same challenge for recycled water as when the water is collected at the plant, treated, and then being stored for when it is to be used. And early in the study, we had a conversation with a representative from the County Sanitation District, and storage would be the next larger barrier to producing a lot more water and getting it out for users both south of and north of the facility. Along with that, depending on the changing in demand, there would need to perhaps be additional mechanical facilities to boost the flows out to wherever it's going. There was a study that, one of the ones that Colleen mentioned, that looked at delivering recycled water to areas beyond what we've presented here as well. And you can see that it hasn't gone there yet. It's generally gone south. Very likely for the reason of the affordability of delivering the water to the south. I'll comment that I believe at your last meeting discussion about the upcoming groundwater sustainability planning, and many of these topics would be in the purview of that discussion, that nexus between surface water, groundwater, recycled water, and all those things. There'll be discussion that's coming from all that.
Are there any other
Just
questions?
to add that to that a little bit, the treatment facility treats what comes to them, and then it's really how much they can store during the off-season. It's used for irrigation, so during most winters, the recycled water is not needed for irrigation because there's rainfall irrigating the crops, the fields, whatever. So they have built some storage. They've built some booster pump capacity at the treatment facility, which is great, and so that expands the availability of recycled water for a longer duration. They are also impacted by drought, so when there's a drought, people need more recycled water, and they have less water flowing to the plant because people are in an intense water conservation mode.
Are there any other questions from the City Council? Having none, then I'm going to take this out to the public for comments. You're going to be deaf.
Hi, Fred Allebach again, 19550 8th Street East, and I think this is the total right direction to move in. I've just read a couple of books about, and some Southern California municipalities are moving to zero water import and using recycled water only. And so single-use water in a water-scarce future in California can't afford single-use water to just flush it and have it be gone and then use fresh water every time. So recycled water really is the future, and for a municipality like Sonoma that's at the end of the pipeline from water that comes from a whole other watershed is a classic Western water situation that makes Sonoma really vulnerable, and in a drought or an earthquake or whatever, that that's just not a position that you would want to find yourself in. So let's see, I made a couple of notes here. And so the Sonoma County water is not guaranteed in an uncertain future to come here. So if the city takes steps to secure its own supply of recycled water from within the valley that's generated out of the wastewater use here, that's a really smart thing to do. So I would suggest that the city look forward to using as much of this as possible, and that the benefits justify the cost, and that this really represents just one type of planning ahead for an uncertain water future here in the situation that Sonoma's in, with a regulated groundwater future and the supplies uncertain coming from another watershed. One thing that if you do it here, I would put links out to all the property owners along the way so that people along the route could use it if they wanted to. And then you could also use it for aquifer recharge on city wells. And so the water then that's recharged is going to spread out into the city area, and then the city will harvest that same water. So you could buy the water, recharge it, and use it for your own wells and other purposes, and it would be cleaned up in the groundwater system as well. So one thing to keep in mind is that the water agency is selling a fair number of acre feet to the Napa Sonoma salt marsh now for their excess capacity to restore the salt marsh there. And so when that water becomes available, I think that's going to be over in about 8 years. And so that's a substantial number of acre feet that the city could keep its eye on maybe getting, and say we'd like to get that when that's up. So you could keep an eye on using that capacity in the future. And I had made a suggestion sometime earlier to the city manager about selling Pinelli Park for $4 million and paying off the cemetery debt. But if you're going to use it for a pump station, maybe that wouldn't work.
Thank you, Mr. Allebach.
Good evening, Council. Chris Petlock again. So a couple points. So per mile of pipe in the ground, about $1.2 to $1.5 million. That's the city's cost. Construction price index before labor for these things are between 7 and 25%. So it's only going to get more expensive if you're going to do it. Plan to spend a lot of money on it. In LA and Orange County, they have recycling programs where they put it into the ground over there and they pump it out over there, and it's about the same quality as what Sonoma County Sanitation District is giving back to us right now as recycled water. So people are drinking it in the South. Just so we're all aware, we have 3 customers right now for this water. One's the city, and it looks like 2 are the school. But everybody here is paying for this. I mean, how short-sighted is that? It really seems like, these customers should be paying for it unless we're going to do more with this. If we're going to go further, I'd be glad to pay for it if we could see recycled water throughout the city. But if it's really just, 2 or 3 locations, they should be paying for it. Well water costs. I brought this up last time. Pumping water out of the ground, at least at this time, is about 1/3 the cost it is from Sonoma County Water Agency. This is a great way to keep our costs down. And then finally, just a real quick note, they're charging $700 an acre foot to pump it 10 miles. I mean, that's crazy. Sonoma County Water Agency is charging just under $1,000 to pump it 40 miles. Somebody thinks that water's worth something. I mean, it's just crazy. 40 miles versus 10 miles, and you just have about a 30% difference there. So that water is definitely worth something to somebody. So I think having a futures contract or something like that in place, as long as we can really use it, it'd be a shame to watch all this money go to waste. And certainly any money going toward a future contract that we really aren't going to be willing to pony up for in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So, our city manager, did you hear any questions that you might? And I think I have to say, and maybe I heard it wrong, if Mr. Petlock was suggesting we just pump from the wells and use that water, is that what I was hearing? Well.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes. We have wells right now that we pump into our drinking water system because it's potable water, good to drink, and that's the most cost-effective water source we have right now.
I think possibly our gentleman from the GSA committee might.
Yeah. Well, I'll just start off the conversation on this agenda item. I did like a few things that I heard my colleagues talk about, Councilmember Harrington, looking into the feasibility of making sure that, because we're not doing this, it stops. But the thing that always concerns me sometimes with all these agenda items is one's linked to the other, and what happens is things just get lost. And I think Councilmember Hunley was talking about that a little bit, about how things, maybe we should have been updated a little bit more through this process, because when I came to the council 4 years ago, and I wanted to drill a well on the plaza, which I still do, and probably the main reason was because there was a staff recommendation that said it wasn't feasible. We'd be looking at recycled water. Well, here we're kind of doing a different dance, so it kind of changes the whole matrix of how things are looked at. Because I always looked at it with the city of Sonoma, and I do agree with the public speaker, you can pump it cheaper than you can transport it. And I think that's very important, because if you look at other things that are happening, like water banking, which I 100% agree with, it's clean, fresh water from the Russian River that comes in here. It's not recycled water. And the reason I say that there's 2 different things there is because of our all the prescription drugs used in, by humans and get flushed down the toilet, and they just cannot get out of that. So I've always been a big proponent of the city of Sonoma putting a well in the plaza, because if we ever do get into some major drought issues and we have to tell all of our citizens that they have to conserve, at least they can go to one spot and kids will remember what grass looks like. And this might be 50 to 100 years, and maybe it won't happen. I do think that the recycled water is a great idea for landscaping. So that's why I do agree with what Councilmember Harrington. I would hate to lose that. But at this time, I think the city of Sonoma, we got to get really serious. And with the GSA, the formation of that, which is its own entity, which the city of Sonoma belongs to, and I'm the representative. One thing I'd really like to see and urge this council to do in the future, now and in the future, is really take a look at this so Sonoma can protect itself. Because one other public comment was that we're at the end of a rusty pipe. I remember 9 years ago, council members sitting where I'm sitting, and they were talking about it, and they were talking about it very serious. And it wasn't because there was a drought. It was because if you look at cost and different things that happened, our infrastructure at the time isn't what it is today. Thank goodness for some good planning in the last 9 years that we've able to fix that. But I think it's probably the number one issue, and in Sonoma is water. So I'm not saying that we should put a purple pipe up Broadway at this time, but I think that we should look at the feasibility of having that in the major plan and have the discussion at least where we can go back and we can talk about it. And I do urge this council to look at putting in a well in the plaza. I was told it was going to cost $1 million by the last public works director, and I think I mentioned to him that I could dig that with a shovel for less than $1 million. Meaning that you could have most agriculture wells would cost between $60,000 and $90,000 with an 8-inch casing. So it's not, it wouldn't be $1 million. And my thought was, and then I'll be quiet, is my thought was that if we did, it would be for non-potable water, because that way you don't have to go through all that. And that would be irrigation of the lawns. And that would be something that maybe we could start our infrastructure, because I've heard council members in the past say it, that nobody planned for this. And what we did is we put one pipe down the street and we started hooking up houses. And those houses are flushing toilets, watering their yard, and drinking the same water. It doesn't matter if you're watering your lawn, washing your car, it's all the same water. It's too bad that it wasn't separated, but it's not too late for Sonoma, because we could drill a well in the plaza and we could start moving our matrix or our system throughout that part. And what you said was true. That's what all agriculture does, is we go to the tank first. So you go from point A to point B, and then your distribution lines come back down, and that's where you get your pressure. So I think that the reason I'm bringing this up and using so much time is I really believe that sometimes the council hears different recommendation based on other things, but nobody comes back around and says, maybe that well that Cook wants to do isn't a bad idea, because it's going to cost X amount of dollars to put a purple pipe in, that everybody knows. Probably what will happen is, with all the agriculture that happens south of the city, they're going to use up most of that water. And as water is something that is not going to grow in numbers, it's going to be conserved more. So if you really look at what the sanitation department's going to end up with in 10 years, I would really like to see what those numbers are, but it's not like it's an increasing amount. So with that, I will be supporting this tonight. I want to thank staff. I really appreciate. Water is not an easy thing. There's been people that have made a lot of money with it, and there's a lot of people that went broke because of water. So it's the meaning of life, and I'm kind of jealous. I wish I had your job, because I like water.
Well, it's interesting, the comments, about this, because it's just, I don't know. I'm fearful of us saying, let's just take that water out of the ground, because there's an aquifer down there, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to figure out eventually you'll be figuring out who is using what. Is that right with the GSA? That's something that's very important.
Well, the GSA, will be a study to see what happens, or what is happening and what has happened and what will probably happen, and then figure out ways to mitigate it so it doesn't turn into a disaster like what's happened to some other areas in the world. And that's where...
I guess I don't agree in indiscriminately just pumping.
And that's where, and you have to remember, where is it being pumped to? Like if you're watering a lawn at the plaza, I've always said some of that water is going down. It's the same thing I've always said in vineyards.
And collected.
If we irrigate at night, you'll notice that that water is disappearing. It's not going into a pipe and going to a sanitation department. It's actually being recycled. And that's why when I saw the first slide, I thought it was very interesting that staff said what they said on the first sentence, because it was very true. We've been recycling water since Earth began, because that is the natural way. What we're doing is a human way. But when you water the plaza, that water goes down and it trickles at some point and hits some aquifer.
Okay, well, I think I want to make sure I close the public comments. Okay, thank you. And did you have a question or?
I have comments. I think everybody has comments.
No, I'm talking about the public. I wanted to make sure I closed that. So does anyone else have any comments?
I guess I had the same thought as Councilmember Edwards with regard to the repaving of Broadway, and I understand that there may be convenience issues or, coordination issues about not doing it through Caltrans, but it seems like a tremendous opportunity to, if the street is going to be torn up anyway, to, if not this, but figure out what other infrastructure we'd want to have underneath Broadway at that time. Is there a question?
I'm just wondering if Matt can comment on that at all in terms of the cost savings associated with taking the opportunity to put a pipe under Broadway in advance of Caltrans paving, where if it was like with the West Napa Street water project, it was important. We needed to do that project. The water system needed work along Napa, West Napa, and it was important for us to do the work that we needed to do anyways before Caltrans came through and paved the road. Not so much to save money, but because once the paving was done, we would degrade the paving significantly if we came back through with a water project after that. In this case, we're talking about potential cost savings from putting a pipe under the ground before they pave the street, and I'm not sure that there would be significant savings associated with that.
Perhaps you could go to the slide that showed the alignment. That would be helpful in, I think, answering this. It's about in the middle of the presentation. Right there. So the pipeline obviously being constructed where road work is happening, there would be a cost benefit to that. There'd be some shared costs. But the total length of the pipe to get from the lower left up to the plaza would be about the same distance. You'd be just following a different part of the street network as opposed to the ones that we looked at. So the length of pipe and the cost associated with that would be about the same. You would have some cost savings in Broadway itself that might save some percentage on the top of that project. That would be offset in some ways by that future risk of what Caltrans could ask you to do within their right-of-way. You can never exactly predict what that is. They generally try to exclude utilities from being parallel in their right-of-way, allowing for things to cross. They just don't like to have to come back to municipalities and say that you have to move or modify your pipe.
So I guess the question before us really is, are we going to accept the study, which I'm prepared to do, useful information, but I do, as a follow-up, I think it is in our best interest to try and work on some kind of right to enter into a contract for water at a future date. And I don't think you were here just in this town at the time of the drought, but the scarcity of water and the demand for water from agriculture and other sources was tremendous. And during those times, assuming they're going to be worse and worse in the future, I think this is, if we have access to that contract now, that is a really valuable resource to secure.
So I don't think there are any more comments. Is there a motion out here?
I'll do one of each. My last comment is that I hope that we just don't put this on a shelf somewhere, and I think this is something that we should actively work towards, and I hope 10 years from now, our plaza is being watered by recycled water. And like my worst fear is that, you know, either there's going to be some extended drought that's going to last past 5 years, or there's going to be an earthquake and we're going to get cut off from the Russian River. And like, we need to be in a position where we know that we can take care of our fundamental needs, and like the fact that we're using our precious groundwater to, for non-drinking purposes, just, you know, it just seems wrong to me if there's other alternatives available. Got a comment?
So
To the mayor.
I like Broadway as well, but I also think I drive up and down 8th Street every day, and there's the rail right away, or at least some of it is left over, and when it ties into the bike path, it'd be interesting to keep thinking that direction, to have water coming up 8th Street to the bike path, to the cemetery.
I agree, because I saw in the report that it was preferred to not use public paths like bike paths, but to me it makes more sense. I guess it was like width is the problem, it's not wide enough. But it's like, I'd rather, because they put the pipe down my street, and it's a little interrupting while they're digging a big trench in your street, and it takes a while, and it's very loud, and this is a lot of houses, but, you know, if it's our bike path, might as well put a pipe under it.
And then put the bike path back on top.
And then, of course, put the bike path back on. So what is this, a resolution? Okay.
Sorry, may I just add, based on the conversation I'm hearing from council, if you want to in the resolution, if you wanted to add to the resolution, there's a, you know, therefore be it resolved that the council approves the feasibility analysis. If you wanted to add another whereas, I mean, now therefore, you could add and ask staff to, direct staff to explore some kind of a futures contract to secure additional recycled water. If you want to do that, it would be good to just, we could take that as a verbal and put it within the resolution if that's of interest to council. If you're going to do that too, there's 2 other minor edits I would do within this reso. On the second page, there's 2 whereases that start with city staff. Those really should be the city council, not city staff, or just the city. So I just wanted to throw that out. If there is interest, the way to do that so that we actually memorialize it, not just as a broad conversation, would be to add it to the resolution.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes. So first, I'd like to make a motion to approve a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma to approve the recycled water feasibility analysis prepared by GHD Inc. with the following modifications. First, that on the second page, both whereases that begin with city staff are changed to city council. And I don't know if my colleagues want to add a sentence if someone's a better wordsmith than me, but whereas the city will continue to pursue, what was your suggestion?
Yeah, direct staff to explore securing additional recycled water allotment for the future from the district, a future option. For future options.
Futures options.
And I think the city clerk is typing away that kind of broad statement.
So this sounds like a motion. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Edwards. Our city clerk, could you take a roll call for us, please?
Yes. Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Hunley?
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes 5-0 unanimously.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good sheep,
Colleen.
chickens,
Thank you.
turkeys. 2, 3,
So
5.
now
No,
I'd like to
was
move,
a
I'd like
pretty
to
good
move on to
fabrication.
council members' reports and comments.
Red fence.
I'm not
Tiny
seeing
house.
any. City manager's comments and announcements.
None tonight, thank you.
I have none, and I'm sorry, would the city clerk remind me, do I need a motion to adjourn? Okay, gosh darn it, I'm adjourning this meeting at, oh criminy, 8:50. Thank you. Thank you very much.